friends. Speaking of our presenters, today we are lucky enough to have Toni Stephan, who will be speaking to us about planting for pollinator success. As we see a decline in habitat and floral resources for pollinators and other insects, studies have shown the importance of gardening to their success. This class will help the gardener identify trees, shrubs, perennials, and annuals that are important for pollinators to thrive. It will also identify some gardening techniques that will help maintain pollinator populations in your garden and landscape. Toni Stephan is a retired OSU Extension instructor in agriculture and horticulture. She was certified as a master gardener in Central Oregon in 1998 and has continued through to 2025. Her main gardening interests are the insects. They use the garden as their home. Since 2018, she has focused mainly on native bees in the garden and their native environments. With no further ado at this point, I will turn things over to Toni by stopping sharing my screen. Take it away, Toni.
Right. Thank you, Frank. I am going to turn my video off because we've been having some glitches with me freezing up. So just to let everybody know, and then I'll open my video for questions. Okay, let's try and see if I can make this happen. Is it there? You can see it?
We can all see it. Looks beautiful.
You can see it. Wonderful. Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank the Central Oregon Master Gardener Association for inviting me to speak today. And of course, everybody else who's here, and maybe hopefully to learn maybe even just one thing that you may not know, or to reinforce ideas that you already know. For my presentation today, I'm going to talk about helping pollinators. The way I'll do this is first, I'll offer some information on what pollinators need to exist, and then I'll follow this with a selection of plants that will help the gardener meet these needs while choosing plants that will create a beautiful garden for themselves. Okay, a little slow. In order to produce seeds, plants need pollination to occur. Some plants can self-pollinate. Others get pollinated by wind or water moving the pollen. Most flowering plants need to be pollinated with pollen from flowers of the same species. This creates bigger and more vigorous seeds. Did you know that 90% of flowering plants need the services of pollinators to move their pollen? Because guess what? They don't have legs. They can't move. Let me see. There we go. Spreading pollen from flower to flower can take place on small flowers on the same flower head, for example, on the aster up in the upper left-hand corner. It can occur from flower to flower on the same plant as on this fern bush, which in the bottom center bottom, or it can occur from flower to flower of the same species on different plants, like on these bitterroot. The assistance for moving pollen comes in large part by way of pollinators. There's a wide variety of pollinators, insects, birds, bats, and other animals. In this presentation, though, I'm going to focus on the insect pollinators, like butterflies and moths, beetles, flies and wasps, and bees. Bees are the very best pollinators for a couple of reasons. First of all, they purposely collect pollen because the number of offspring they can create is directly related to the amount of pollen they collect. They have specially designed hairs that carry a positive charge, which causes the pollen, which has a negative charge, to cling to the bees' hairs better than other pollinators. So it's like two magnets clamping together. Also, the bees' hairs are feathered or split, so that helps collect and hold the pollen even better. They often go to the same type of flowers in each foraging mission. So they take pollen, for example, pollen from here to pollen here and here and here. Each one of these is an individual flower, and each one of these can use the pollen that the bee is collecting and dropping on this flower head. In some of the areas of the world, insect populations have declined over 40% in the last 50 plus years. This is largely due to loss of habitat. This decline, though, is not consistent across the board. A recent butterfly survey from 2000 to 2020 reported that butterfly populations have declined nearly 20% in the United States. That same survey, however, showed a 9% increase of lepidopterans in the Pacific Northwest during this same time. So we're doing something right, but how do we keep our pollinator numbers up? Well, our gardens are part of the answer to this question. Though many humans like a neat, tidy garden or live in areas that expect this, insects like it messy. On the left is more like native habitat for insects. Now, I know y'all don't want to have a garden that looks like this. So here's my garden, part of my garden in the fall. I don't think it looks too bad. In fact, I kind of think it looks pretty nice. Some of you might say this is a messy garden, but that's okay because here's that same garden in the winter or going into winter. And as I put it up next to the photo on the left, I said, dang, I think I'm getting it. I think I'm accomplishing my goal. So notice all the sites in this garden that insects could be using for overwintering in any life stage they may be in. Leaving a garden untidy, especially in the winter, preserves the cavity nesting bee larvae, the moth cocoons, the butterfly chrysalises, and sites for important other insects. I challenge you to think of ways that you can add a little mess in your landscape for pollinators and other insects. If you can, leave spring cleanup, what you're doing right now, leave that cleanup stuff in a hidden pile until June or July so all the overwintering immature insects have a chance to emerge. Here's an example of why I say this. On the left, you can see this is a blackberry bush, and you see the old dead canes. And you might normally want to say, I'm going to prune all these out right now. But in the middle, let me just show you that. In the middle, you can see the cane with the hole in it. For this presentation, okay. If you look closely, you can see that the hole has a plug. So way down in here, you can see that plug. For this presentation, I cut off about 2.5 inches of this cane, and I split it open to show you the bee larvae still developing with inside of it. So here's the end I just showed you. Here's the cut end, and here's the cut end on the stem that I left. Notice there's still a plug in the middle of that stem that I cut off. If you cut out these old cane, so let me just show you. These are the bee larvae right here. And there were two right here. I opened them up just to make sure these were actually bees, which they were. On this one, I cut in half. So these are still bee larvae developing, and so are the ones in the lower part of the cane. So if you cut out these old canes, you'll lose and throw them away. You'll lose the bees unless you store them in a dry area until the bees emerge. Layering the landscape and using as many native plants as possible creates shelter and host plants for all insects. So if you attended this morning's lecture, the speaker talked about this layering in the three-dimensional form. So here you have tall trees, whether they're conifers or hopefully it's a mix of conifer and deciduous. Then you have the taller shrubs, a little shorter shrub, shorter shrub, and then down where your perennials, your sub-shrubs, and your lawn might be. But anyway, by layering and using as many native plants as possible, this creates shelter and host plants for insects. A meadow like lawn, like this one, is a great space to allow for native bee habitat because there's a lot of open ground here. So, and layering can be done even in small urban lots. The lots are so close together that your neighbor's yard may, if it's got anything in it, okay, work to help provide habitat. This is a great place to use your ornamental plants also in this landscape, and using ornamental plants in the landscape to help fill in the floral gaps throughout the season, the gaps where the natives have gone dormant. These ornamental plants are important resources for our generalist species. Now, I'm going to use the term generalist and specialist quite often. So just in case somebody doesn't know what I'm talking about, a generalist is a species, an insect that can go from plant to plant to plant, different varieties, different genuses, different genera rather, different types of plants. They're generalists. They can use a lot of plants for their floral resources. We're specialists, and they're going to primarily use, or they are going to use, the native plants. They specialize on maybe one or two genera of plants, and some that are super specialists, maybe only one genera of plant. So here we see bee nest entrances in bare soil. Where the arrows are, I've pointed out some of the bigger ones, but you can see another one here, and probably here and here. So there are several bee nesting entrances right here. These like to make their nest where the morning sun is available. This helps them warm up quickly so they can get out early. Many pollinators, such as beetles and moths, also use bare soil as sites for egg laying, larval development, and pupation. While 70% of our native bees need bare soil for their nesting sites, 30% of the native bees are cavity nesters. So again, keeping old logs, snags, dead trees, plants with pithy stems or twigs with soft, empty centers, or even using bundles of reeds is a good way to create that habitat. Since flowers provide nectar for pollinators to attract a excuse me, to attract a variety of pollinators, use a wide variety of plants with different colors and forms. Nectar provides quick energy. It contains sugar, some amino acids, vitamins, and minerals. I just learned in a course I took through Pollinator Partnership that nectar is 8 to 50% sweet sugar. Chocolate is 10% sweet sugar. That's a lot of energy in a little sip. Pollen is a protein source for some adult pollinators, as well as some pollinators in their larval form. So here you see the adult longhorn beetle, and here you see the larva of a native bee on this pollen ball. Pollen contains small amounts of starch, sugars, fats and oils, minerals, and other stuff. Stuff, that's a very scientific word. Staggering floral blooms is a way to have pollen and nectar present in all seasons. You can see on the left here of the photo, one plant has been deadheaded, showing us that it was in bloom earlier, so there's staggering going on. Studies have been done in 2005 and 2008 that showed that gardens with, this is key, 8 or more species of native plants, 8 or more species of native plants increased both abundance and diversity of native pollinators. And in the course that I was mentioning before from Pollinator Partnership, they have these cards available. They're called 3x3 cards, and they demonstrate plants that you can plant in your area that give 3 in the spring, 3 in the summer, and 3 in the fall. So they're giving us 9 species. So 8 or more native species or species of native plants increase both abundance and diversity of native pollinators. These same studies showed that flowering native plants were 4 times as likely to attract pollinators than non-natives. There's a lot of competition among the various pollinators. So plants have devised schemes to attract pollinators to them. One of these schemes is color. So if you take a look at the top line up here, you can see the pollinator is at the very top and the color is right here on this top row. So one of these being color, various colors attract the different pollinators. The idea that pollinators are attracted to certain flowers is called a pollinator syndrome. It's not totally understood and certainly not totally restrictive. As you can see right here, bees are supposed to like bright white, yellow, blue in color, and they're also attracted to UV. So this bumblebee is clearly not in a white, yellow, or blue flower, but yet red. So this pollinator syndrome, again, is not restrictive. It's quite, this is a rose in my yard. It's my mom's rose. And one day I passed it by and the rose was going zzz, zzz. And I'm looking around, what in the heck is that? All of a sudden, zzz, zzz. And I see this bumblebee coming out of this rose. At the time, I didn't know that roses benefited from buzz pollination similarly as tomato plants. And so it was quite interesting that this bumblebee was doing that. So another scheme of flowers for attracting pollinators is the use of something like directional arrows, neon signs for us, called nectar guides. You'll notice the plant on the left, the flower on the left, has all these markings which are kind of directing it, the bee down into way down in there to collect where the nectar is. These nectar guides are markings or patterns seen in the flowers. And again, they direct the pollinator to the nectar rewards. Along with bees, hummingbirds, hawk moths, and syrphid flies have been found to respond to nectar guides. Some flowers, like the one on the right here, even have overlapping visible nectar guides. So you see right here what we see in the flower, this is what a bee sees. So this happens to be a UV guide. So I think that explains why the bumblebee was in that red rose. There were UV guides that she was using in this flower that I couldn't see, but she certainly could. So this combination of nectar guide and UV guide is possibly, the theory is, to attract birds as well as bees simultaneously. Some plants even produce other rewards, such as resins and oils or waxes. Here is a little diantherium species, this little bee right here. This is the female doing her job collecting the resin, and this is a male. So this is not one bee, but 2, and he is doing his job also. The resin that she's going to collect is used to construct her nest. This type of plant is an important addition to the garden for insects that need this resource. This happens to be fernbush or Camebateria millefolium, which is a great plant, flowers in the summer with a big white bloom. All kinds of pollinators love it. I won't be showing it in my plant selection today, but it is a great plant. You want diverse types of flowers in the garden, blooming at all time and throughout the season. Different sizes, shapes, and scents of flowers attract different types of pollinators. Conserve energy of the pollinator, especially our native bees, since many of them are very, very small, and also to maximize pollination of flowers, plant in clumps. Now, some plants just automatically become quite large themselves, as some of the ones, most of the ones shown here. But some of our plants are not very big, and so we would want to plant them in large groupings. These large groupings make it easy for native bees to get pollen from flowers of the same species and get it back to the same flower. This is called flower constancy. Remember, the more pollen a female bee can collect directly influences the number and size of her offspring. Even wind-pollinated plants can be part of the pollinator garden. Use clump-forming native grasses as well as ornamentals to provide habitat. Native grasses, however, are a food source and nesting site for small butterflies like some skippers. And I know that there are other insects that use these, other pollinators that use these, but I'm not a specialist on that, so I'm not going to try and say any more. Bumblebee queens may use the base of clump grasses to overwinter and may find rodent holes around the base of clump grasses in the spring when they're looking for a new nest, a site for a new nest. Weeds can be part of a perfect pollinator habitat. Now, I'm not advocating that let your weeds get out of control. I'm not saying that at all. But a few weeds here and there aren't going to make that much of a difference in your yard, and they may make a big difference to the early and late pollinators. They add to floral choices. And as we learned from this morning, you can see the dandelions here. Maybe dandelion pollen isn't that great, it isn't that rich, but hey, something's better than nothing in my book, and I think in the insects book too. But use management practices that will keep plants in check. For example, make sure your water is getting where you want the water to be. Fertilizing properly is an important step. Putting your desired plants in the right place so that they're competitive and they grow strongly, out competing any weeds that might be there. Flip seed heads, whether it be from actual weeds or plants in your garden that have a tendency to get weedy, in your opinion. Hand pull weeds that you don't want. I want to mention that pesticide in the garden should not be necessary, especially in your flower garden. Things like insecticides, which kill insects. We want pollinators to inhabit that area, and use of things that kill them, even if they're organic, okay, will reduce the number of beneficial insects and pollinators in your garden. If you have a large space, I don't think that even herbicides are necessary in your garden, but if you have a large space, herbicides, which are weed killers, might be necessary to control a big problem, something that's gotten out of control. But once you get control of troublemakers, once they're in check, go back to manual maintenance to keep that control. To keep it under control. Don't continue to use herbicides. When you don't need them, don't use them. Fungicides, things that fight disease, have also been shown to harm certain types of pollinators, especially bees that we know of. So these too should be used sparingly, if at all, in the garden. All right, so that's basically the end of the first part of the presentation. The rest of the presentation, I'm going to show some plants that I have selected for this presentation. These are not at all the plants that are available, but they are some. But I do want to say that I'm not going to go over all the needs of plants because I feel like this is something that each gardener needs to do themselves just to help learn your plants better. I want to say, though, that when looking at growing conditions for plants, the information that you might see is where they are native to. For example, things like low water use, okay, dry, mesic, or wet, that's water use. Drought tolerance, where they like to grow, what kind of soil they like to grow in. This is information for their native ranges. And so it may not apply exactly the same way to the area that that you're going to grow them in. For example, things like manzanita and wild lilac, which are more native to the higher elevations, will be a little bit more difficult to grow in the lower elevations than in their natural or native sites. All right, so let's look at some plants. I'll start with trees and shrubs. Why trees and shrubs? Well, Cass Urban Mead, a pollinator conservation biologist, basically said it herself. Because of their sheer size and volume, trees and shrubs provide copious amounts of pollen and nectar, larval food, hanging sites for butterfly chrysalises, nesting material, nesting and egg laying sites. These are large plants, and so they can host a large number of insects. Even trees and shrubs that aren't resources necessarily for nectar and pollen are important additions to a pollinator garden. They give safe haven. All right, so let's start off with the plants now. I'm sure I won't cover every plant that you wanted me to cover, but I'm going to give it a good try to cover a bunch. Willow, one of the earliest blooming plants, okay, trees. Now we know it as a shrub, probably in the wild. It can come as a tree from like nurseries and places like that. I'm not sure that they're as good as pollen resource and nectar resource because they are not native, but the natives are almost always going to be better. So these are one of the earliest pollinator resources. The willows don't need pollinators, but the pollinators need willows. Since these are natives, they are larval hosts for butterflies and moths. And I can tell you that we have collected, as part of the Oregon Bee Atlas, we have collected some really rare bee species off of willows. But they're such a great pollinator plant. They also, of course, if they host, a great host for generalists. Curl-leaf mountain mahogany. In nature, we see it usually as a shrub. So this is it, not this grass, but this plant here and this one here. Curl-leaf mountain mahogany, another native. This one is in bloom right now in some areas. In fact, my friend Phil in Pal Butte called me, I think it was just late last week or early this week, and said his mountain mahogany are blooming and the pollinators are all over it. This is an example of his mountain mahogany that he has trained into a small tree, a multi-stem small tree. You can stand under the branches of this tree, so that's how high he's got it pruned up. It's about a 20 to 25 foot tree, I think. And this one's about 30 years old. It is just absolutely stunning, I think, pruned up as a small tree. Maples. We have some native maples, but maples come in small to medium-sized trees, except for, I guess, if you're on the other side of the mountains, the big leaf maple is a pretty large tree. They offer early pollen and nectar to all kinds of pollinator, but the benefit that maples have in the garden is they give some great fall color. The benefit, of course, other than offering pollen and nectar. Here's a great little native. It in the wild, again, is probably more of a shrub. You can purchase it in nurseries as a small single leader tree. The photo on the left shows you as a multi-stemmed, I would consider this a large shrub or small tree. The photo on the right is at the extension office and it's in the shrub form. This is obviously a spring bloomer. It's a larval host to butterfly species. And because it's a native, it also provides nesting material. I believe that the nesting material it's going to provide is to leafcutter bees, because the texture, the thickness of the leaf on this plant is perfect for them using for their nesting material. It's also a great host for other beneficial insects. And this is the flower of that plant. This, hands down, is my favorite shrub tree for pollinators. In the wild, you're going to see it as a multi-stem shrub. In nurseries, you can get it as a single trunked tree. The chokecherry, Prunus virginiana, you can see the flower on the right and the little bee right here. So this is a nice panicle of white flowers. It also comes with purple leaves in the as Prunus virginiana Schubert or Canada red chokecherry. On the bottom right, you can see the larva of the western tiger swallowtail butterfly. It kind of looks like bird poop on a leaf. Also, the polyphemus moth caterpillar uses this for larval food. I do want to just mention really fast, when I say larval food, I mean that the caterpillars are going to be chewing the leaves. And yes, you're going to see some damage. But just think, if you want to have the adult forms of the pollinators, you must allow the larvae, the caterpillar, to feed on the host plant. Okay, here's our next shrub. It's also as early, no, I take that back. It's a little bit earlier blooming than the willow, but it's more of a true shrub. And so this is greenleaf manzanita. This is the one at the extension office in bloom earlier this year. It starts to bloom mid to late March. This year, bees were noted on it on March 25th, which is actually a week later than last year. It's also larval food to the western brown elfin butterfly. Here's the flower. So you can see it's kind of that hanging urn type. And you can see this male Anthophora bee getting a nice sip of nectar. Though this is one of the earliest shrubs to bloom, it's often difficult to keep healthy in a landscape situation. Remember, this is more of a high elevation plant that gets some summer cloudburst rain and so forth. And if we bring it down here to the shrub step, I think that it has a hard time staying healthy. but it's a great plant. Here's a really good currant. This is wax currant, Riboserium. I think it's a really good plant for the smaller garden, especially the small urban gardens. And as areas are getting smaller, this plant is well behaved. It's about maybe 2 weeks later start to bloom than the manzanita. But mine is in full bloom. In fact, it's been blooming long enough that it's starting to go out of bloom. Here is the flower of that particular. Okay, so here you can see it's kind of a fluted flower with some pink and white. And we see another little Anthophora bee enjoying some nectar off of this. You can see the leaves are kind of scalloped edge. It's quite an attractive little plant. I would say that it probably maximum size, probably about 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet, give or take. It could, of course, sometimes get past that. Here's the fruit set. So if you like birds, it is also going to attract some birds to your yard. Here is another currant. This is called golden currant, Riboserium, another native. This plant I planted at the same time that I just showed you the wax currant, and it is about 3 to 4 times as large as the wax currant right now. So it does send out short runners, not super long, but this plant is getting to be about 8 feet wide in my area, 5.5 feet tall. So if you're going to use this in a small urban lot, I would definitely make sure that you have given it enough room. I probably didn't give it enough room because already it's starting to overtake some of my other plants, but I'm okay with that because this plant has the aroma of clove, which I love. So I go outside several times a day just to smell the fragrance of this plant in the air. I'm not sure if it's specific to all golden currants or if I just got lucky, but it is a wonderful fragrance. This has been blooming. It started blooming about 2 days after the wax currant. It's in strong bloom right now, and the pollinators are all over it. It's a great plant for your early pollinators. And here is the flower with a bumblebee enjoying sweet sips of nectar and hopefully gathering some pollen at the same time. Here's our state flower, the Oregon grape, tall Oregon grape. Some of you know it as Mahonia aquifolia. Several years ago, it had a name change, Berberis aquifolia. It's still the same plant, just with a different name. Notice the spines on the margin of the leaves. So if you have an area that you want to keep people out of, it's a great plant for that because those spines are kind of sharp sometimes. Here's the flower of that plant. I saw this blooming on March 27th this year in Redmond. So you can see it's fairly early bloomer, very early bloomer. All kinds of, because it's so early. So the idea, if it's an early blooming plant, if it's a late blooming plant, just about all pollinators are going to be attracted to it. So keep that in mind. This, however, can be a bit invasive. Well, I have to say more than a bit. It can be very invasive because it will send out runners 3-4 feet away from the parent plant. So if you have a small landscape, probably not the plant for you. I would use the low growing Berberis repens instead, which is not as aggressive. I like this plant because it does give you some beautiful fall color. Here it is in fall. And in winter, it's going to turn more of a purple mahogany. More spring bloomers. Well, I say berries in general, so they're not all spring bloomers, but berries. Pollinators love berries. And the benefit, or an additional benefit, if you do raspberries or blackberries, is remember the pithy stems from these plants, leave them in your garden, and you may, probably will, attract cavity nesting bees using those pithy centers. This is a shrub I'm not super familiar with, but it's for higher elevations. I've looked for bees on it before, not very successfully. I know that a lot of butterflies, however, like this plant. Again, it's a higher elevation plant. I see it a lot in Sun River, La Pine areas, even up toward Subtle Lake, going up towards Sisters and Subtle Lake area. So it's a little bit higher elevation plant. It wants a little bit more water than certainly I have in the outside of Redmond area. It attracts butterflies. In fact, it's the larval host, so that means caterpillars chew on its leaves, of the California tortoise shell. Interesting butterfly, California tortoise shell butterfly. Interesting fact that maybe you or do or don't know is both the California tortoiseshell and mourning cloak butterflies overwinter here in Central Oregon as adults. They find shelter in deep bark crevices of trees. For example, juniper. I cut juniper for firewood, and once in a while, I come across a mourning cloak seeking refuge in the winter. I don't know about how they use other trees like ponderosas. I would expect that they probably do. I would expect that they would probably be in crevices of rocks where rocks have split apart or something like that. But I think it's pretty cool that they actually overwinter here in Central Oregon. Here's a plant that many of you do know. There's a native species, Dasyphora fruticosa, used to be Potentilla fruticosa. It's had a name change also. It attracts basically everything. It's a larval food for some of our butterflies and moths. This yellow one, I know it may not be everybody's favorite color, but I find the yellow one to be the most hardy and the most resilient in our Central Oregon region. I think the ones that are varieties that, the white, the mangoes, the peaches, just in my opinion, through my years of landscaping, being hired as working as a landscaper, sorry, the other colors just don't last as long. This is not a native. This is Abelia mosinensis. You can see that name on the bottom. But earlier this year, I ran across information that it too has had a name change to Zabilia. What is that? Taihione, maybe? I don't know. This is native to Korea. It is hardy to zone 4. It's not a larval food for any of our butterfly and moth caterpillars. So you're not going to see a lot of chewing on this. If that's important to you, then this is a great plant. But even though it's not larval food, it is adult pollinators just can't resist it. It is absolutely beautiful. Here's the flower. You can see that kind of pinky red outside color, and then the reflex white of the petals underneath. And certainly this is a large bumblebee. Her name is Bombus morsonii. She is our second largest bumblebee in our area, and she is on the threatened threatened species list. So her habitat is shrinking. So I feel like anything that we can do to help her get some nectar, mostly nectar, and here the pollen's not going to be all that great for her, but certainly sips of nectar is a good thing. So I said pollinators can't resist it, adult pollinators, and the fragrance will lure you in as well. It is absolutely just luscious, as this swallowtail is also indicating to you. The adults will absolutely dive into this. Looking at some late summer bloomers. So just about anything that I think blooms in the fall is going to attract somebody for either nectar and or pollen and or nectar and pollen. So blue mist spirea, Caryopteris exclandinensis is one of those plants. It attracts everybody, beetles, moths, butterflies, bees, flies, wasps, and I'm not talking, well, sometimes the stinging wasp, but mostly I'm talking about non-stinging wasps. They can sting, but they're not interested in stinging you. What I really enjoy about this plant is it comes with some diversity. For example, if you take a look at the flowers on this one, they are pretty dark blue, where this one is a pretty light blue. There are even lighter blues. There are varieties that have yellow leaves with a really pale blue or violet type color flower. And again, being a late summer bloomer, this attracts just about everybody. Even if it's just for the nectar, it's still energy so that they can work to get pollen elsewhere. Okay. Rabbit brush. I think you either love it or you hate it. We have several different types of rabbit brush in our area. It's a late summer bloomer. It's a native. Pollinators have grown up through thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of years with this plant. If you don't want it to reseed after it is bloomed, after all the pollinators have gone to bed for the year, cut the seed heads off. This is one of those plants that blooms late in the fall, so you can prune it back after it blooms, whether you do it after it blooms in the winter or whether you do it in the spring. I would prefer that you do it later than early because it could be harboring new life for next year. But if you got to cut it back, cut it back. It is a wonderful resource. Let me just show you. Look at this little bee right here. She looks pretty big, but if you think the size of a rabbit brush flower, it is not very big. This little bee, this Perdita, is about 5, maybe 6 millimeters long. I said millimeters. Yes, she's tiny. She's so tiny, she's called a fairy bee. But she makes her nest directly under the rabbit brush because she's so small. It's a huge difference body-wise to these flowers. So she nests directly under the plant that she's getting her pollen and nectar from. So she is called a specialist bee. This is the plant that she has to have in order to live. However, rabbit brush is also a food resource for our larger generalist bees, such as bumblebees. And here we see a sand wasp. We'll see beetles and flies on rabbit brush. It is just a great shrub. So let's move on from trees and shrubs to perennials. And I don't really think I put any sub-shrubs in here. I put that category. Technically, blue mist spirea is a sub-shrub, so maybe sometime I'll move her. Native plants. Research has been done which demonstrates that having 70% native plants in a landscape, 70% in the landscape will support native fauna at the current level. Why native plants? Because native plants support native insects by feeding larval stages of butterflies and moths, providing not only pollen and nectar, but high quality pollen and nectar. Native plant pollen and nectar is at a higher quality than the ornamentals that we will put in our garden. There's more fats, there's more oils, which especially in the fall, guess what? Insects are trying to bulk up. If they have to overwinter, they're trying to put on fat reserves. So they really need that high quality protein. But they're also uh, food sources to like those little perditas, which are specialist bees, as well as generalists. They provide nesting sites and nesting materials. Okay, let's look at some perennials and subshrubs in flower. I talked about how important natives are, but bulbs are not native, except for we do have the native camas. It's not native in our area. I know that, but it will grow here. Bulbs are so important that because they're early, and so they're just really important. They're for any early pollinator. Here's a honeybee. Here's, I don't know which little bee this is. This is a bumblebee, the hunty eye queen. The early pollinators are going to use these bulbs. This is an example of using a non-native, which can help fill in the resources when natives haven't started or aren't in bloom. So basket of gold is blooming in my yard right now. My natives aren't blooming. This plant is covered with tiny. I tried to get pictures of the bees, but they're so tiny. You won't even really see them on here. But the early tiny bees, and I've seen hair streaks on this already this year, flies, of course, on this. So it's an example of using a non-native plant, which is going to help fill in those floral gaps. Oregon sunshine is a wonderful native plant. It's larval food. It feeds specialist bees, the pollen and nectar on here. And of course, the generalists, when I say specialist bees use this plant, understand that generalists will also use those same plants. So we have two genotypes of Oregon sunshine. On the bottom right, you can see the Western genotype. It's a bit larger plant. It's more green. The flowers are a little bit smaller. And I think it does better with a little bit of water, not an overabundance of water, but a little bit of water to look its best. The plant in the middle of the screen is the east side genome, or the east side type of Oregon sunshine. You can see that it's not as green, so it's got some gray coloration to the plant. It's got more fine hairs, which makes it more drought tolerant. It's got a larger bloom, which gives it a larger landing pad for butterflies and so forth. Both of these will reseed if you let them. In my yard, I don't have a lot of boundaries because I have a big place, and so I don't have a lot of boundaries for plants, so I let them reseed. If you have boundaries in your yard, if you let them reseed, then you'll need to, control them either by hand pulling or deadhead them before they reseed. Here's another native. Okay, I admit this may not be the prettiest plant, and you may not want it in your front and center garden. It won't do very well there anyway, because you're going to water your front and center garden probably, and this one doesn't like water, so it will rot out. But if you have paths, if you have, garden edges that don't get water, this is a great plant to use. It's Phacelia hustata. It's the east side native Phacelia. The west side has a Phacelia tenacetifolia that is actually native to the western United States, but not our side of the mountains because it likes a little bit more moisture. But this plant is so drought tolerant. It does not need water, period, nor does the east side Oregon sunshine. The flower is there on the right. It's also called scorpion weed. It's got a fiddle neck type flower that kind of unrolls, kind of like a fern frond does. Anyway, not the prettiest flower, but it's so very important to our little tiny specialist bees. Um, in my opinion, no garden should be without it, but maybe your garden won't be the right place. But this is the little tiny specialist bee that I caught the first year I was part of the Oregon Bee Atlas. Notice her chocolate abdomen. She just, it just she just warmed me up. I just love this little bee because I call her my little chocolate bee. But what is also unique about her and caught my attention is look at the size of her head. This head is, bigger than her thorax, as big as her abdomen. How can this little tiny bee hold that head up to fly? Phacelia hustata, silverleaf phacelia, attracts many of these specialist bees and tiny pollinators. All right, let me get off the phacelia. Can you tell I love it? I know this plant isn't new to many of you, but it's such a great plant, I just can't leave it out. Once catmint starts blooming in late spring, it blooms all season long if you deadhead it. Bees love this plant, butterflies, flower flies, the solitary wasps. Don't remember I've seen too many beetles on it, but I'm sure I must have. And here is a photo that was given to me last year. One of the extension staff saw this monarch butterfly nectaring, only nectaring, on this catmint. So this is only this actual second monarch butterfly that has been reported to me in the 30 years that I've been here. I know there have been more, but one was in my garden. But anyway, they don't happen very often here. This is not their fly way. So if you get a chance to see them, it's pretty glorious. I just wanted to tell you one more little story. When I was pruning my catmint last year, pruning the old growth out of it, I noticed an Uutheka, which is the egg case of praying mantids. So kind of a reminder of me to tell you, look for other insects in your plants too. One way to cover ground without using mulch is to use a plant. This is a nice little ground cover. It comes in many different floral choices. The little tiny pollinators, the small butterflies love this. And as you can see, even the big bumblebees, she's almost too big for the flower. She loves it just as much. So many types of penstemon, early and late bloomers, short and tall, many colors. Some can even take a little bit of moisture, while others, like Palmer's penstemon, needs to be absolutely dry. This is a source of moth and butterfly and bee larval food. And of course, many adult pollinators nectar on this plant. I hope I'm not. Globe mallow is a plant that Amy Jo introduced me to a few years ago. It's a great source of a great food source for our specialist bees, for some specialist bees. Flies love it, butterflies love it. It flowers all season long, especially once it starts flowering, of course, all season long, especially if you deadhead it. If you don't deadhead it, this and the catmint that I showed a little earlier will strongly reseed. It's a larval food for the caterpillar of the common checkered skipper and nesting sites for other pollinators. These stems can get pretty thick, so if you only prune them back halfway in the fall, or not in the fall, I'm sorry, as you deadhead them, prune them back halfway, then maybe some of the small bees can use them as a nesting resource. Another one that many of you will know is Coreopsis. I like it because it attracts all kinds of pollinators, not specialists, of course, because it's not a native, but not a native here, but it will attract all different kinds of pollinators. It comes in several varieties, some with narrow leaves and small flowers, like the one on the bottom, and some with like the one on the right with the larger flowers for larger butterflies, a huge landing pad, and of course, larger leaves. Mid to late summer, this plant, Asclepias tuberosa, is a beautiful plant. She comes up later in the spring. She might not even start showing up until mid-May. And so I always mark where my Asclepias tuberosa is, because she does like to come up late in the spring or early summer. She's a native as far as Arizona and Utah. I love this plant as an alternate to showy milkweed, because showy milkweed can become invasive. But this Asclepias tuberosa, orange butterfly weed, will support all life stages of the monarch butterfly, just like showy milkweed. So yes, she'll lay her eggs on this. The caterpillar will feed on this, and certainly the pollen and nectar, or the nectar, I should say, are resources for the monarch butterfly. And other pollinators will use her nectar also. Again, this will not spread like showy milkweed. I've had a couple of seedlings. In fact, last year I had more seedlings than ever before, and I probably have 5 or 6 seedlings last year. So it is not aggressive like showy milkweed. Again, another plant that a lot of you already know. This is hummingbird mint, or Agastaki. Comes in many different varieties now. We do have a native. The native is Agastaki utricifolia, and it has, this is not it, but it has sort of a seed head or flower head, sorry, like the one in the background here. I do prefer, personally, I prefer rupestris and canna, Agastaki rupestris and Agastaki canna, to some of the varieties that they're coming. I just find them to be very, very short-lived, in at least my garden. And again, being a fall bloomer, this plant is going to attract many, many pollinators. Only a few more to go, and then we'll get to questions. I put New England aster instead of Douglas aster as our fall aster, because Douglas aster can be very aggressive in the garden. I thought maybe that it wouldn't be as aggressive in our gardens here on the east side of the mountains as it is on the west side, so I planted a couple. And I think this is going to be its 3rd, maybe 4th year in the garden. And one 5-inch potted plant has now spread out to about 8 feet, meandering through all my other plants and becoming quite a little pest. So this New England aster, though it doesn't have the same ratings probably from the garden ecology lab as Douglas aster, it is a great plant. It comes in several different colors. All kinds of pollinators love this. Again, it's a fall bloomer, so resources are more scarce than in the summer, and everybody is trying to boost up their energy and fats. So this is a great plant. Goldenrod is a native. A lot of people think it's a weed. A lot of people think it causes allergies. It does not. It does not. Pollen from this plant, as most pollen that are not windborne is a heavy pollen. It's not going to be blown around by the wind, so you're not getting allergies from this plant. It is a great resource for many of our, I'm not going to say many, for all of our adult pollinators in the fall. It requires a little bit more moisture than, just planting it out in the desert. It's not going to work. So you've got to have a little bit of moisture. On to the last set of flowers, the annuals. This is going to finish this up. Many annuals can supply pollen and nectar to your generalist pollinators. Your specialists are not going to go to these non-native annuals. So here on the left, you see on this cosmos, you see this little green metallic sweat bee. Her name is Agapostemon. She's collecting pollen off of this because she's a generalist. In the middle, you see the zinnias, and you see the butterfly nectaring on this and maybe collecting some pollen accidentally. She doesn't collect pollen on purpose. But do remember that to use plants that are single petaled and not really tightly petaled for a couple of different reasons. First of all, pollinators can't get to the pollen. And second of all, the anthers, which are the male part of the flower that hold the pollen, those anthers are changed to petals to make them double. So there's not as much pollen even available, even if an insect can get to it. And of course, the annual sunflower. Again, if you're wanting it to be a resource for pollen and nectar for generalists or generalist species, you have to plant sunflowers that have pollen. Do not plant the pollenless type. Otherwise, they're not going to be as good a resource. A couple of native annuals. I will say that the next three photos that I show you are native annuals, and they do reseed greatly. If you don't want them to reseed, you will have to cut off the seed heads. So California poppy, it's a great resource for floral specialists. It does not have nectar. It has pollen only, but copious amounts of it. Again, if you want this not to reseed in your garden, clip the seed heads off before they mature. You can also clip off the leaves as they're dying out. I have found that by doing that, you can get this plant to reflower later in the year, late summer or fall. It won't be as spectacular, but it'll still be there. And in this photo, you see a mating pair of Calliops obscurella, which is, I think, a great reason to plant this flower, this California poppy, because this is a very rare bee in our area, and they love California poppy. Rocky Mountain bee plant is another one of these great plants. It will bloom, basically late spring to fall, just like the California poppy. California poppy will have a summer dormant period that it's not in bloom. Rocky Mountain bee plant, however, will bloom, put late spring. It's going to bloom, I think, more like summer. But you can see by the photos that it attracts many different types of pollinators, butterflies, flies, bees of all kinds. And then the Globegilia, along with Douglas aster. Globegilia scored 100% at the garden ecology lab trials for both insect, or I should say native bee abundance, which means they had a lot of them on there, and native bee diversity, which means there were a lot of different kinds. But this plant, like others, will reseed. I find that rabbits keep this pretty much in check in my garden. Uh-oh, shoot. I don't know what happened, you guys. Uh-oh. Can somebody help me out? I don't know what happened.
Why don't you stop sharing and then just reshare your,
Oh, okay. That's a good idea.
yeah,
I think my finger hit
yeah.
that little
That.
scrolly button. Yeah, sorry.
There you
Sorry,
go.
everybody. I only
Good,
have two more
good
photos
recovery.
anyway. Yeah, I only have two more. And it's basically the summary. So yay. So but I didn't put the summary on my notes, so I needed the slides. Anyway, so steps for success. Let me recover. Plant a variety of plants with different color, bloom, time, shape, fragrance, flower size. So yeah, diversity, diversity, diversity. Plant in groups, mass groupings in the sun. Use a three-dimensional landscape. Incorporate natives for pollinator diversity. Do you remember how many I said? 8 or 9 natives will give you will increase your abundance and diversity. I don't know how many times, but 8 or 9 natives at least. More if you can. Pollinators like to rough it. That super tidy garden that maybe you like doesn't support all life cycles. So if you can, especially going into winter, leave your garden messy, save spring cleanup material in a space where it won't bug you and where it's contained so it won't blow all over the place. Include bare patches of soil for ground nesting bees. Leave the stems for cavity nesters, and practice tolerance. You don't have to pull every weed. You don't have to get rid of everything. Maybe clip seed heads, or at least in the shoulder seasons, spring and fall. Leave a few weeds so that there's more resources for the pollinators. Reduce or don't use pesticides. Okay. So I guess we can go on to questions because
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds
thank you
great.
all very much. I think I missed my last slide. Did I
That
quit sharing?
you did. Yep.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Tony. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Yeah, we have some questions here, so I'm going to get started. A few of them are mine because it's
Hey,
something I'm very interested in. Okay, so we have our first question is, can you recommend flowering pollinators, or I guess, flowers for pollinators, for shady areas? Laura says she has a backyard that has juniper and pine shade.
okay. So that is a really good question. As you notice, and all these flowers are sun loving. Pollinators are sun loving. They want flowers that are in sun. So that the stuff that's in the shade, that grows in the shade, well, I'm not going to say don't attract or doesn't attract pollinators. It's not going to attract very many because our pollinators like the sun.
Okay. That's the fact. All right.
That's the fact.
That's the facts. Can you
Hey,
please just
just one. Hey, Frank, just one.
go ahead?
If
Yeah.
you ever been out in the garden and you notice it's a cloudy day and the sun goes behind the clouds, what happens to the pollinators? They
Yeah,
disappear, and
that
they
is
wait till
true.
the sun comes back out, and they come out. So maybe that
Yeah.
helps.
Yeah. There you go. Great. Yeah. It's so great. Great to learn from you, Tony, here. Here's another great question concerning nutrition here. It says, can you please describe the nutrition difference between nectar and pollen?
Sure.
And which pollinators prefer which at what times of year? I mean, that's a
Okay.
lot. That's pretty
That
packed.
that's a huge. Okay, so if you remember, I said that bees collect pollen on purpose. So they're intentional pollinators. They're saying, I got to go get that pollen. Because guess what? They feed that pollen to their babies. Okay. When they make that pollen ball, they lay an egg on it. When the egg hatches and becomes a larva, that larva feeds on that pollen ball. The other pollinators don't do that. They are not intentional pollinators. That's why I say bees are our best because they're collecting pollen on purpose. They're not intentionally pollinating, but because they collect the pollen as they move through the flowers, pollen drops off, pollen picks up, pollen drops off. And so they are our best pollinators because they intentionally collect pollen. Okay. The other pollinators are accidental pollinators. So they are only picking up pollen accidentally. So I hope this answers the question. Bees collect pollen as a resource for their larvae, and sometimes they feed on a little bit. Beetles will eat some pollen as a resource, as an energy resource. Most of the other pollinators are just nectaring. They're getting the high energy, syrupy nectar to go on their way. So, while beetles, maybe some solitary wasps feed on pollen. It's the bees that rely on that pollen the most for their life cycle. Does that answer did I get off track? Uh-oh, I don't hear you.
Unmute. I'm sorry, I just muted
Okay.
myself. Yeah, so I guess the main point is bees and pollen, right? I mean, for
Well,
the
it
most
said
part.
something, it
Yeah.
said something about
Um,
pollen and nectar
Nutrition
being
difference,
the
you said? Did you talk
nutrition.
about that? I
Yeah,
guess
yeah.
yeah, did
So,
that and
so
pollinators. Yeah,
So nutrition difference, if you remember, I said nectar is the high energy source.
correct. Mhm.
It's a sugary drink. Pollen is the starch and it's the carbohydrate. I'm sorry, it's the fats and oils, which is for building life.
Yeah, yeah, great. Great. Yeah, and if anybody has more questions, just keep coming in. So that's good. Karen asks, are native plants generally deer resistant?
Deer resistant. Okay. So the definition of deer resistant I'm going to use is that deer don't kill them when they're browsing on them. Native plants are oftentimes browse plants. They have
Right.
grown with the deer in our area, and deer can munch on them, but they don't usually munch them to the ground like they do our really soft, tender um, uh, ornamentals that we put in. So while the deer may browse them, they generally don't eat them down to the ground. Generally, I have, yeah,
Mhm.
generally.
Okay, great. Okay, yeah, one person wants to know, this was a question I had too, is where can you buy orange butterfly weed? I've never seen it in stores around here. Do you have any suggestions or?
It is, yeah. I'm glad somebody liked that plant. I have seen it at least one of the native garden centers. I think I've seen it at uh Winter Creek, at
Winter
Winter
Creek
Creek.
area?
I think I've
Mhm.
seen it. You can also get it in seeds. Um, I have I actually started mine from seed. Now, I'm not a great seed starter, so I only got, like a couple of plants to come up, but yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, good. I'll check them out too. So whoever wrote that question, yeah, check out Winter Creek if you haven't. And Laura
Or
asks,
from seed.
or from C. Yeah. Is there a variety of goldenrod that is not aggressive? I pulled mine out. She pulled hers out because it came up everywhere in my other flower beds. Kind of like Douglas aster. I've had that
Yeah,
problem with Douglas aster.
yeah, yeah. I think the key to something like that, if you don't want it to spread, is plant it in a container. For example, when I did, do you want me to stop?
No, that was a great suggestion. Yes,
Oh,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. For example, when I started showing milkweed, I decided one year that, oh, I probably should do some showy milkweed. I put it in a bathtub. It has, it has the drain in it, and it is a solid bottom. I figured it's not going to go anywhere, right? It's not going to spread rhizomously, which it did not,
Mhm.
but it seeded in several
Mm.
locations. And that's when I said, nah, I'm not going to do this plant. But it sure did keep it from spreading it through the ground. So
Yeah.
something like like your goldenrod or even the Doug aster. Maybe I should have done that with Doug aster too, because yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's this reminds me of Jen, even when she had her talk here, it was about herbs and somebody had asked about mint, try how to get it not to spread. And she said plant in like maybe a wide PVC pipe, or like you said, plant in a pot and just submerge the pot. And this way it can't go like, especially, Douglas aster and the like, rhizominous, they're just going to go everywhere. So
They do,
yeah,
yeah.
that's great. Great answer. Okay. And yeah, I had this question too, is Teresa asked, where can we find those 3x3 cards you mentioned? The 3x3s.
Okay, so in the resource list that you're going to get, I
Okay.
think with this thing, I talk about pollinator partnership. So you can go to their website, pollinatorpartnership.org, if I remember right. And you go to the resource and it's going to say garden cards. I think they're called garden cards.
Mhm.
What I have found out about those is they're not necessarily 100% accurate for our area. For example, I typed in my zip code, which is 97756, and it came up with plants more like for Bend area. So then I used Prineville zip code, and I think it was a little bit more relatable to my area. So, but that's where you find them, and they are really nice resources.
Great, great. Yes, and we have one more question here before I'm going to give you one more question from me. How bad is vinegar for getting rid of invasive weeds? I guess, does it damage pollinators or is it bad for pollinators?
Okay, so what vinegar is going to do, it's going to change the pH of the soil. And so if you're changing our native pollinators have grown up with our soil type. Okay, so if you change that pH too much, then I do believe that you will affect um, whether they want to nest in that soil. I don't know, I don't have any evidence, so I can't say whether it's going to affect the larval development or anything like that. But I do think that it might affect whether they nest in that. Now, that's just me guessing. I have no scientific evidence of that, but we do know that as soil changes, so does life inside of it. Um, um, and so, yeah, using vinegar, remember, vinegar is a burn down herbicide. Okay. And so it's only going to control those weeds that won't come back up from like roots or crowns or something like that. Or you can just continue to use it. But yeah, I can't scientifically or by research say that it's going to do much effect, but just logically, I think that it will change the soil so that the insects may not like it to nest in it.
Okay. All right, great. Yeah, we have one more question here. So if you live where in an area where there's an HOA that doesn't allow messy yards, I mean, any suggestions? What would you suggest? I don't know, to get pollinators there.
Yeah, I thought about
Yeah.
this, how I would, because I was pretty sure somebody might ask this question. How would I answer this? I think if you can find even just a little spot in your yard, maybe not in the front, but maybe a backyard or an area that's kind of hidden from view, and you can make it a little messy. I realize that, not everybody's going to have a yard like mine, which is totally messy. But because you have limitations, but maybe definitely hiding those spring clippings, containing them in an area where they can't be seen and where you kind of screen them so they don't blow all over is going to be one way. But actually making that garden messy, you may not be able to get it as messy as the slide that I showed you, but maybe make it just a little messier than it is. I don't know.
Mhm.
I don't
Yeah.
have the perfect answer for that. Try and find, and I'm not advocating make your whole yard messy, make your whole garden messy. Maybe just make one little garden messy.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Yeah, I wish I had that suggestion before I did all my spring cleaning and put it all in the bin. Would have been great to just, well, next year I'll put it all in the pile because,
Yep.
yeah, all that good stuff there, it's going on in that thing. And now it's in a
Yeah.
landfill somewhere or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
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 Okay. Well, we don't have any more questions here, Tony. Anything else you want to say before we go or before I say goodbye to everybody?
I just want to once again say thank you, everybody, for coming to this class as well as any of the other classes that you participated in. And thanks for you guys for inviting me to talk.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Toni. Thank you so much. And again, like Toni said, thanks to everyone. Please take time, though, to fill out our short survey that you'll receive after we leave here. Your feedback helps us greatly in improving these seminars. So thanks so much. Bye, everyone.
Are you keeping us on?
Thank you, everybody. Nope, I am hanging up so people can go, because if we stay on, they stay on. We can reconvene, but thank you.
All right, guys.
All right, bye.